for a very interesting conversation today. How are you
Uh,
doing?
yeah, really well. Looking
Good.
forward to whatever we're going to talk about today. Hi, everyone. Hope you're well.
Okay, so one of my favorite subjects, gaslighting. It is a word
Oh,
that is very rife at the moment. There's a few, ghosting's another one, and there's some more that we could probably pull out. But
hmm
what we thought we'd do today is have a chat around gaslighting, and I'm gonna ask Andrew some questions on his understanding of it or his perspective on gaslighting, and let's see where this conversation takes us. And I think the reason
Just
for
before you
me.
go on, I'm a little bit worried about the fact that you're interviewing me on gaslighting. Is there any presuppositions running here?
Well, you can let me know at the end of it. Let's have a look. Um, yeah, for me, it's something that I've been watching used a lot. I won't say overused, and I won't go too much into my own perspective on it. I want to hear from you as well, Andrew. But it is a word that's very rife out there, and uh, yeah, it's a use of language that I think is definitely worth exploring. And for some people, it might be, they may get a change of perspective once they listen to this conversation today on that word, or maybe not. But just to try and get a bit more understanding from a human behavior, expertise perspective from us on how we deem these kind of new words that are emerging. So, Andrew,
Uh,
yeah,
hmm.
what do you?
I'd just actually
Yeah,
say, like, if we bring it out a little more generally as well, I mean, I think a lot of people, whether they use the term gaslighting or not, there's a lot of relational difficulties out there at the moment. And so this podcast, I think, will just be helpful for people that are suffering in their relationships in some way, shape, or form. So we'll do gaslighting specifically, and I'll try and weave in some stuff around relationships as well, if that's okay.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. So Andrew, what's your understanding of the word gaslighting? What does it mean to you? Tell us all.
Well, it actually has no real meaning to me, to be honest, personally. But I guess if we're going with the socially defined definition of it, then I think it came from a movie, earlier last century. And it was when a gentleman, I believe, I'll probably get it wrong, but, was um, manipulating his partner by turning off and on the lights and other things. And so it's got to do with perceived manipulation in a relationship and altering someone's perspective of reality. That's how I understand it,
Yeah, I love that.
as in the social construction of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
How
yeah,
about
yeah.
you? Curious.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I mean that's. Yeah, I would agree with what you say. I don't want to put my stance on it. I want to obviously
Okay,
talk to you
cool.
about it, and we can go into that a bit more afterwards.
Yeah,
But
cool.
yeah,
So that's the
totally.
social
Yeah, it's
that's the social definition of it,
yeah,
and I think where I was going with the broader relational difficulties. I mean, we have 50% of the population that will ultimately end up in divorce. I don't really know the stats around relationship breakups and breakdowns and et cetera, but I think everyone goes through the different ups and downs with relationships, and at times, well, it's always caused by a difference in perspectives. And some people want the comfort and safety of applying a label to something or someone outside of themselves so they can justify their suffering. And that might sound a little bit harsh, but as humans, we just like to label things so we can put them in categories and boxes and we can understand our experience of, relationships, be it suffering or pleasure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Do, could you give an example of what you just said there? Maybe in a situation in a relationship between two people, how might that play
Yeah,
out?
sure.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, not to get controversial, but let's just take you and I as an example. I don't think we've ever used the term gaslighting with each other, but we do have difference in perspectives all the time.
sure.
And if I feel disaffected by something, or perhaps if you feel disaffected by something, we could go and reach for the word gaslighting. Well, don't gaslight me, or you're gaslighting me now, or whatever. And it's a bit of a safety valve. But if I've got a strong opinion on something and, someone really challenges it vigorously and presents me a point of view that I've previously considered and found perhaps not to be as robust as my own, then, I'll tend to take my own. I don't tend to actually call their perspective gaslighting, but some people will.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, variation on that is, for me, the way that I guess I would describe it and see it is, it's one of those things where two people are in a situation and one person is saying, talking, let's say we're discussing an event from yesterday. You've got two people, they're in a romantic relationship, a friendship, whatever, mother, daughter, whatever, and they're having a discussion about what happened yesterday. And there was an argument,
Yep.
say, that took place. And from one person's standpoint, this is what happened. And from another person's standpoint, they've got a different version of what happened. And both of them can only see their own perspective, and they are taking that as the truth of what happened the day before. So one of them is going, no, what you're saying is bullshit. And this is what happened. And this is the way it played out. And this is this. And this is this. And the other person is going, no, that's not what happened. But they might be a little bit confused now. And what can happen in these types of dynamic when gaslighting comes up is that one person is just more internally referent and they're stronger in the way that they present. They might be more confident, not really confident, but appear confident. And the other person can be a little bit more of a, maybe let's say a people pleaser, someone who doesn't fully trust themselves, isn't as confident on the external. And then that's how this thing can play out in situations where, because there's this person that's quite unsure of themselves, they may be a bit distrusting, they now start to second guess their own perspective, which was true for them in that moment. But now there's someone telling them something else. They're feeling maybe like it's being forced on them. And this is where the word gaslighting, in theory, has been brought in to protect. It's kind of this protection language because we haven't got to grips and a grasp of the deeper levels of human behavior, that we do have our own power and our own choice and perspective around our own truths, and so do other people. And that's kind of where I see a lot of this playing out for relationships.
Let's bring in an example from a discussion we had yesterday without giving too much away. But, Anita and I love what you've just shared. So, I would call it like a reality bubble. Each of us are walking around in our own reality bubbles. We see the world the way we are, not the way it is. And so, we were sharing yesterday about, a car drive in Queensland after a client workshop. And we were having a conversation about something. The content doesn't really matter. And I made the observation to you that I felt like we disconnected in the conversation at one point. And, I'd made some meaning around that. There was a disconnection, there was a bit of silence, and, we had probably an hour in the car where we just had silence to ourselves. And, I was thinking in that hour space, and I was thinking, I wonder what was going on for Anita. And I was thinking about, I wonder what's going on for myself here. And so I'd come up with my own perspective in my own reality bubble. And, as part of coming up with that perspective, I went back through all the past history of interaction that we've probably ever had. And I'm like, what's it most likely to be? And what do I guess it's going to be? And, I remember we were talking about it yesterday, and I shared my point of view, and it was radically different to yours. You said I was tired, so I just stopped talking.
Quiet. I was having a sleep.
Yeah. I mean, we were both knackered after a long day at the workshop. But it's really interesting. Now, when you replied with, I'm tired, that event was important to me. And, I felt we disconnected in that moment, and I had sort of a different perspective that I'd made up in my own head. And I could have taken the path of, thinking that might be gaslighting.
Sure.
She's making it up. She wasn't really tired. She's just making an excuse for shitty behavior, et cetera, or not. And, I guess you got to ask yourself, is it helpful to label something as gaslighting or not? And, if I had made the decision to label that as gaslighting, then our relationship would probably have suffered as a result of that. But actually being able to hold back and say, yeah, everyone's entitled to their own perspective. Everyone does have different perspectives, allows space for an exchange and a movement back to a healthier relating dynamic. So just to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the key to this all. So it's like, if we didn't have words such as, let's say, gaslighting, then we might, and I get where we're at in society and humanity, that we need these words right now. But what having words like that prevents us from doing is actually having a conversation, because now we don't go into what's actually happening, in this relationship, what's happening for us. We go straight to, there's that word, I've heard that before, it's gaslighting. It must be gaslighting that's happening. And that prevents us from going, let's sit down and have a conversation here and get to the deeper root of things. Instead, we just reach for these words. And this is the danger in it all. And this is the same as I said at the start, there's ghosting as well, because that's another word that comes up. So instead of going, okay, let me have an interaction with this person as to why they might have missed this appointment, it could be a work thing, get these words are used a lot, right? Whether it's in a workspace or in, a relationship environment, whatever. But it's like, they've ghosted me, as if it's personal to me. And then we don't get past actually having a conversation with someone to say, when you missed that appointment yesterday, I just wondered what was going on for you. It's straight to, I've been ghosted or I've been gaslit. So it's like, I get why these words are there because of, where we are, but they're not the potential of us as humans. They're words that we can reach for to protect ourselves and go, right, I'm not going to be around that person anymore because they've done this to me. They've gaslit me. They've ghosted me, blah, bblah, blah. Rather than going, let's have a chat about this and see what else might be here, what else might be going on. So yeah,
100%.
Yeah, big one. Okay, so what would you say, Andrew, would be really beneficial for people, that do feel like they get gaslit a lot? What might be, something that they can start to maybe consider?
Yeah, well, I think the solution to a perception of gaslighting is to develop a stronger, what we call internal authority. And I think you mentioned it earlier. I mean, that's the root solution to perceiving like you're gaslit. It's sort of a move where you allow everyone to have their own perspective, and all the external perspectives you might ever come across, are all valid to the person that's delivering them, and they're all coming from their stage of maturity. Yeah. And so you can just recognize and honor that, and then be with your own. So the most important thing is knowing your own perspective and how you've arrived at it, and what might be valid about it, and what might be open to interpretation, or what might be unknown, or what might be discoverable. Yeah. And so, I think that's the root solution to gaslighting. And, maybe as we go through the chat, we can explore a little bit about how maturity plays a role in this. But I would say that that's the main thing for me, developing a stronger internal compass and a stronger sense of self.
And how would one do that?
Yeah, validate.
Sign up with coaching.
Yeah,
with us.
Come into coaching.
Come and get gaslit by us.
Well, yeah, come and get gaslit in our cult. Yeah. So I think it's validating yourself for most people. You could say it's, feeling like your opinion and perspective is worth something. It's feeling like whatever's given rise to your perspective has some truth. It has some validity.
Sure.
And, the third thing, you're lovable regardless, whatever your perspective is, how well developed it is, how true it is, you're lovable regardless. And they're the three sort of baselines of bringing on a stronger sense of self, or a stronger internal authority. And then to add to that, I'd probably say that, where a lot of this comes from is this cult of narcissism. So narcissism's another
word. Yeah, it's another good one.
Yeah, just goes right hand in hand. He's a narcissist. Yeah. She's a narcissist. Yeah. And therefore, because they're a narcissist, they gaslit me.
Yes.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit more as we go.
Or ghosted me.
Or ghosted me, or whatever. Anita would have loved it a couple of years ago if I had ghosted her. Anyway.
I'm still open.
They're still open. Right. Okay. Consider it done. So, where were we? I think they're the three things that are the most important. But the big thing that people are talking about these days is psychological safety. And so if a person doesn't feel safe, to have their perspective, or to share their perspective, or if it gets hounded down by an assertive or an aggressive human being, they could consider themselves as not being psychologically safe. And from that position of not considering yourself being secure, you're more likely to label these external behaviors as gaslighting. Not that there's anything right or wrong with that, but
Sure.
it's just more likely to be a thing in your experience if you're feeling unsafe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what I would add to this as well, it's like, going back to that piece about, well, all of it really, but how do we validate ourselves as well, is to learn how we learned to not validate ourselves. Yeah. So when we see the personality types of someone that's a maybe, and I say confident in inverted commas, because even the overly confident are usually very insecure, and the overconfidence is on behalf of a guise of not wanting to, not giving self permission to seem as insecure. So again, this is
Mm.
the psychological levels of maturity we talked
Mhm.
about earlier. This is when we are not psychologically mature, that we either go overconfident or underconfident, but they're both
Mhm.
the same. They're a trauma response to something. So a big part of this work of learning to validate ourselves is to understand where we learned to be the way that we are. And that goes right back to childhood. Maybe we needed to be overconfident because we had a parent or we got bullied at school. So we built this hard shell around
Yep.
us of confidence that then makes us prime material to be a gaslighter, for example. Or we went the other way, where we were really, bashed down by our parent, and we became really, openly insecure, and didn't learn
Mm.
how to stand up for ourselves, and became the perfect, victim for being gaslit. And so this can
Yeah.
sound really harsh, and I really want to, just send, lots of love and compassion to the people out there, because there is a lot of people suffering this stuff still. That's why this language is being used and it's out there. But the more that we can kind of start to understand this stuff and start to do the work to be able to find out what's happened to us in the past, that's how we will never be gaslit again, or we'll never be, a gaslighter again, in theory. And I think,
Yeah.
that part of the work is really important to build that validation for ourselves within self.
Yeah, totally agree. Can I
Yeah.
share something before you ask me the
Yeah.
next question on that
Yeah.
one? For a person that's perhaps developed an underconfidence or an insecurity, let's say, and I've certainly had variations on that throughout my journey. Um, you can gaslight yourself.
Well, we are. That's
So
all it is.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so, but specifically to help people understand what that
Yeah.
actually means, because I think
Yeah.
most people would understand it as being they have been
Sure.
gaslit by someone else from outside them.
Yeah.
But to doubt yourself, and to procrastinate and ruminate on stuff is actually to gaslight yourself. And so you could have a really strong inner knowing. I know so many people that are very intuitive people. I think you're a very intuitive person too.
I knew you were going to
You
say
don't
that.
do you don't you don't gaslight yourself, but I
But
feel
I
like
do, because
when
we all do. That's what I mean.
we
Even
all
when I talk myself
do
up, I'm gaslighting myself, because we're all, well, that's what we're doing when we're self talking. We're talking ourselves into something, whether we're upping ourselves or downing ourselves. Right? It's all
right,
gaslighting.
right,
So we
right,
kind of,
and
yeah,
and
goes hand in hand.
it's all delusion, right? So
Yeah,
if you're underconfident or insecure in yourself and you believe that you have a perspective that's valid and you don't share it with others, then you're actually gaslighting yourself. That's
yeah,
inauthentic.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and this is how it all sort of hangs together. A lot of people still don't really know what authenticity is. So yeah, I want to just say that self gaslighting, I would say, is probably triply present in society than actual gaslighting. If
for
not even
sure,
more.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind
Mm.
of like, how are we protecting ourselves by gaslighting ourselves and then projecting that onto someone else, because it can help us make decisions, right? If I know that they're gaslighting me, then I can make that choice that I'm not going to be around them anymore, or I'm going to call the police, or whatever, extremes that
Mm.
we've got to go to. So again, it's that
Mm.
that place of finding that psychological, that safety place for ourselves in being able to use this language, but
Right.
without knowing all of this that's running, beneath it. Because again, as I always say, no one ever
Right.
taught us this stuff, right? we're just taught the surface language and the new words that come out, and it doesn't allow us to actually explore the deeper stuff that's running there. So yeah,
We might get into that in a sec.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions before I
Go,
go
go.
certain route? Yeah. Well, I was going to say, just on the maturity aspect of this, I think, and again, not to sound discompassionate to anyone or unempathetic, and a lot of people are going through a lot of suffering. At the most mature that we know about in psychological research, the term gaslighting probably wouldn't be used. And so, it's not really a phenomenon. I'll explain, how that comes to be in a moment. But for now, if we just think about, you talked about childhood earlier on, which is great. It always comes back to that. And so as a child, particularly in the first year of life, there's no us and them. So there's no notion of gaslighting when you're an infant. The world is your oyster. It's all one thing. And then we go through the early years and we're learning, the pattern of to gaslight or to not gaslight from our parents or our caregivers or whoever's, influential in raising us. And then by the time we get to adolescence and, the early 20s, let's say, a lot of people will be in what's called the second order mind, which is very much we're strongly egocentric. So we're on our path to build a good life, to find someone to marry, a house to buy, kids to have, et cetera, et cetera. And we tend to be very ego oriented. And so usually we're fairly resilient to gaslighting at this stage of our development, but we can be seen to be gaslighting others.
Sure.
Because we're very ego dominant.
Yeah.
And so for those people that are out there that feel like they might be being gaslit, it could just be a function of a person's internal development, the sophistication of their internal development. Yeah. And there may actually be no malice or ill intent. In fact, I would say that it's probably pretty rare that there is malice and ill intent, even when someone's being gaslit. And that's not always the case, of course. If there's a messy divorce and a sticky sort of situation, it's probably likely to be harmful intent, which is the genuine definition of gaslighting. Mm-hmm. But more often than not, there's no ill intent. It's just a difference in perspective and where people are coming from. And then, let's say through the mid-20s, through 30s, through 40s for most people, we create our identity in reference to the social context that we're in. For most people. Most people are caught at this stage. And so, when something happens in a relationship, they perceive that it's being done to them at this level of maturity. And they haven't yet been able to recognize that it's their perspective that's driving their internal meaning making. Mm-hmm. And to be able to step away and get a little bit of space from, the phenomena that they're dealing with and making meaning of. And so for the vast majority of people, their health, their confidence, their own belief in their own opinion, their own worthiness, their own lovability, all of these things that we talk about all the time, for most people, that's derived through how they're treated in their relationships.
Yeah.
And that's the way they make meaning. And then there's about 20% of people, maybe a little more, maybe 30, that get beyond that and they can see themselves as, they have a solid sense of who they are, internally, and they're not looking for things outside so much. They're free to be themselves, even in their marriage, even in their intimate relationships, even at work, they'll happily be themselves in the face of, an external authority figure. And they tend to be very resistant to gaslighting. So, they typically wouldn't say that they've been gaslit at this stage. Sometimes they can, but typically if you've got a strong internal authority, you won't. And then, at the very later stages of maturity, we start to realize that we're actually co-creating each other. and we're much, much, much more flexible and malleable. And I know even yesterday we were talking about, we'll deal with things as they come up in the moment.
Mm.
We don't need these rigid structures to feel okay about ourselves anymore.
Mm.
Like, we're happy to go with the flow together and find our ground in the moment. Everything's a process. There's nothing static. There's no boundaries required. There's, or very little.
There's communication, right? That's the key for all of it.
Communication, yeah.
Within that stage that you're talking about is like,
Yeah.
communication is the thing. Let's talk about this, and that's the key to
Yeah.
everything, right? But let's talk about this not from a place of blame, of gaslighting, but from a place of what's going on for both of us, whoever we are in the world. And when we can take that step back, as you said there, it's like, and start to view it more objectively, then we can go, oh, actually, maybe there is something other than what I saw going on here. Maybe there's another person that's suffering just as equally as I am, even though they may look like they're the stronger, the stronger character. And I think the really key thing in all of this is, if you're in a situation where these things, where this stuff is playing out, it's a maturity level that you are equally on if you're blaming each other and gaslighting each other. And so, because often people can think that they're better than the other person, or that they've done more work, or that they're more mature. But if you're sitting there and you're accusing each other of stuff and saying you're gaslighting each other, and all of that blame's coming up, then you're actually, in those moments, you're on the same level. And that can be hard for people to hear. But it's like, it only takes one person to take a stand in that situation and say, right, what's going on? What's happening for you here?
Right.
I'm not blaming you. Let's talk about this. And there's the opportunity, if you are listening to this and you are in a bind with someone, to be that person, to be able to go, right, let's have a proper conversation and get deep in this. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to add to that, again, we come across a lot of people that, have difficulties in their marriage. They might be in an abusive marriage, or they might be in a work situation where they feel like, they have a narcissistic boss or someone that's very aggressive and assertive and direct, and that's difficult for a lot of people. And so, compassion for that.
And for the person that's doing it, there's trauma there. This is trauma from both sides, right?
That's true.
People may be listening to this going, yeah, actually, I'm that boss that's a bit of a, but it is, and you're sitting there and it's like, this isn't about beating yourself up about it. If you are, the more bully, the gaslighter in theory, it's about having compassion for yourself and doing the work, whichever side you sit at, to be able to, start to break those habits and patterns and that trauma response that's still running you from your, 5-year-old self.
Yeah. Yeah. And, just perhaps for the people that perceive that they're being gaslit, or if you are, we don't know, so we can't step into your experience. I'd say that the two words that I want to leave you, and I think we're coming up to time, so I'll just share this and ask me any other questions you like, would be sovereign mind. So, just as much as we have boundaries around our country, whether it's Indonesia where you are, or Australia where I am, we have boundaries to some degree. When we're mature, we have less boundaries, but we all have some boundaries or some principles or some values that we work to. It's about knowing yourself and having sovereignty of your mind. And what that means is that it doesn't matter really what's coming at you. What you're receiving, you're able to hold ground. You're able to be in your center. You're able to feel present in your body. You're able to feel calm. You're able to have an opinion on what's being discussed. You're able to reality test yourself. So how do I know that my opinion holds merit? What might hold merit from what I'm receiving from the other? And just to be able to be really strong, in your own point of view, until better evidence arises that invalidates your own perspective. But I see a lot of people that don't have the strength of their own opinion. And so they're sort of knocked about by the weight of the strength of others. That's the biggest move that anyone could possibly do to overcome it. And it's not about becoming a narcissist yourself. When people have really got this mature, they're quite quiet. They're quite solid in themselves. They're quite confident, but it's a quiet confidence. It's almost like an introverted, everything's a little slower, and it's just a deliberate development of one's point of view. So I hope that helps someone out there.
Yeah. And people might be going, well, that sounds really easy as we say it, but how do we do it? And it takes work, but it's one thing to kind of say it, but it's like, if it's a lifetime of habit, if you're asking yourself, well, how the hell do I do it? It takes a lot of self-work, and whatever self-development work you choose to go down in order to help yourself with that. It's not just going to be an overnight change. Very rarely is it an overnight change to be able to change all of that. It takes work, but it's worth it. It will be worth it for your freedom, for your, your potential to no longer ever be gaslit ever again in your life. And I think just really importantly, to add that we've touched on it as well, is it's not to say that, I think this is the thing, like before we had the word gaslighting, manipulation is same, right? And importantly, to know that as children, we are constantly learning to manipulate situations in order to get love, in order to be liked, in order to maybe not be liked if that's the way that we're going. So we're taught from a very young age the art of manipulation by all the humans around us manipulating. We are constantly, every day, as I sit here talking, hoping that I'm manipulating you into the belief that what I'm saying is true. It's constant hypnotization and manipulation is what we are doing when we want someone to like us or when we want someone to not like us. So we're doing it anyway. And now there's been this word that's been invented called gaslighting, which is highlighting something that we're all doing all of the time anyway. And so there will be situations where there are genuinely people that are really, really traumatized. They're in a situation where there's two people with the trauma, response, where one is, going to get away with something. They're going to lie because they're lying for whatever reason they need to lie to protect themselves. And it's not to say it's wrong or it's right or that it's right, but it's to say this is all trauma stuff. These are all responses. And if we're in dynamics where this stuff is playing out, then get yourself some help. Like get yourself not, I mean, obviously do what you need to do in those situations, but help yourself by trying to work out what it was that took place for you that got you into these situations without judgment, without blame.
And I love that too. And, you just reminded me that because I don't feel like personally I've had much of an experience of being gaslit or feeling like I've been gaslit myself, I perhaps tend to have a little bit of blind spot around people who have been genuinely gaslit. And so I just want to say for people out there that might really be suffering and in a genuine abusive relationship, if you're unsafe, get yourself out because you're gaslighting yourself if you think that you're going to be able to stay and work it out. And so that's the other angle on this too. And so, just wanted to mention that for people that are genuinely going through a gaslighting experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I know with these sorts of conversations, people can listen to this and go, oh, that's really harsh or that's hard. And, I'm really suffering. And we just want to say we're not, we have a lot of compassion for, people in these situations. And I think this type of work that we do with our clients and with, certain individuals, it is for people that have probably already been through some type of therapy work, and are here that are more ready maybe for this stuff. Some people are going to be sitting there going, you guys are talking a load of rubbish and I'm suffering and you're really discompassionate. And we totally understand and get that. And it's like there's stages of this. And when people are ready to start to hear this stuff and to start to, work and start to let this stuff go, that's who we're here to work with. We're not saying that there isn't other work to be done before this kind of
stuff. Well, there's stages and there's different contexts too, isn't it? And I guess we're talking more generally in an ordinary context where there might be a disagreement at home and there's been relational suffering for a while, or there's difficulty with a boss-employee relationship. And, these are the main things or contexts that we're generally talking about. And but there are cases of, genuine abuse and most likely gaslighting going with it. So if anyone's suffering that, then our hearts go out to you.
All right, then. Thanks for those who are still listening. Lovely to have had this chat today, Andrew. Thank you for your perspective. And
Thank you for
back
your question.
next time we'll be back next time for who knows what. If anyone's got any suggestions of any words that you want us to get into, then send them over. Otherwise, we'll